Your brand may be staying on top of current trends, but are you agile enough to stay relevant, resilient, and successful as customers, competition, and the world continues to change at a breakneck pace? I'm thrilled to share the newly revised version of my first book, The Agile Brand. I'm calling it The Agile Brand Revisited. It's been updated to reflect our continually changing world, and it provides 7 principles that form the backbone of an agile brand, offering detailed insights and actionable steps for incorporating them into your business strategy. This is the book that started it all, and I'm excited to share it with you. It's now available in print and digital formats and available everywhere. Learn more by going to the Agile Brand Guide website at www.agilebrandguide.com. Welcome to Season 4 of The Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom, where we discuss business agility through customer experience, employee experience, and digital transformation. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed on this show, you can go to my website at gregkihlstrom.com and read my latest articles or get a copy of my latest book, Meaningful Measurement of the Customer Experience, now available on Amazon and other retailers. My name is Greg Kihlstrom, and I'm the host of the Agile Brand podcast. Today we're going to talk about XLAs, experience level agreements, and how they have an opportunity to transform how IT products and services are delivered and measured. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Weston Morris, Director of Global Strategy for Digital Workplace Services at Unisys, and recently named one of the top 25 thought leaders in service support and customer experience by HDI. Weston, welcome to the show.
Hey, Greg, it is great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to have you. I know, I've been on your show, and it was about time to to have you as a guest on mine. So really looking forward to diving in on some of these topics that I know we're both passionate about. Why don't we start by you giving a little background on yourself and what you're currently doing at Unisys?
Yeah, I've always been a curious person, so I'm glad that I have a job that lets me exercise that curiosity, figuring out what's changing, what are the new technologies, especially in the area of the digital workplace. The stuff we need to do our job, and what's coming in terms of from vendors. What are the new technologies that are coming, and then kind of mapping that to, as I talk with multiple customers and clients around the world, what are their problems? What are the challenges they're facing? And then even looking at, trends like the Great Resignation, the pandemic, the hybrid office, these sorts of, buzzwords we're hearing. What does all that mean in terms of providing our, the employees a great worker experience?
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, let's dive in here. And so let's start by giving a brief introduction to XLAs, especially for those less familiar with them. So why don't you just start by explaining to the audience what exactly is an experience level agreement and maybe how they differ from an SLA or a service level agreement?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up as a comparison, because I think people conflate the two, and they are related. I mean, you might think of an SLA as very simply, it's a measure of a transaction. And its focus is on the output of that transaction. It's kind of like, with blinders on, I'm just looking at a little narrow part of the entire sequence of steps. Whereas an XLA is taking a step back and it's looking at the entire experience. It's really more focused on the outcome as opposed to, the individual outputs. I mean, maybe I'll just give you an example. Maybe an SLA that we all might be familiar with is like if I'm a service desk, average handle time. How long do agents spend on the phone to solve a problem? And historically, the thinking has been, well, shorter is better. It saves money. And in theory, that short average handle time provides a better experience for callers. But really, this measure is creating almost an adversarial relationship between the call center provider and the business. They're all being focused on that SLA. If they miss it, there's a penalty, right? Whereas an XLA might measure the entire experience of callers as they interact with a company. I mean, it doesn't include just that call. It could be, looking on the portal, a chatbot, searching for information. It takes a step back and looks at the entire digital workplace experience. I mean, it could include, how happy am I with my PC, with the apps that I've been given, my onboarding process. And if it's done right, this can result in a partnering relationship instead of an adversarial one between the service provider and the company. I know you did an interview with Lori Dolo just a few weeks back, and you guys talked about patient experience. That's customer experience. An XLA isn't looking at customer experience per se; it's looking at the employee experience. But we all know a great employee experience can lead to a good customer experience. So they're definitely related.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on this a little bit, but let's. What are some of the things that start to happen when we measure outcomes as XLAs do, in addition to outputs? As SLAs are more apt to do.
I think we're probably all familiar with the so-called Hawthorne effect. Measurement drives behavior, and that's what happens here. I mean, for example, if a business sees that customers are late paying for their orders, they may make a change. They now mandate all salespeople. Your commission is now tied to your customers paying on time. And next month, what do we see? One of the salesmen has a perfect record, but all of his customers have paid on time. However, a third of them decided they no longer want to do business with a company that type of cutthroat. So that
Right.
that behavior isn't the desired outcome. When you measure the wrong thing, it can hurt. And the same thing is true in service providers. Going back to my example of the average handle time, we have seen this number being tweaked lower and lower as a way to drive down cost. And so if I'm an agent and I'm working in a call center or a service desk, and I know that my SLA for average handle time is like 4 minutes, I'm watching that clock. If you're calling me, Greg, and I'm helping you, as it gets close to 4 minutes, you can almost hear my anxiety. Like, okay, we need to close
Yeah.
this out, and I'm going to either try to fix it or hand you off at that point to level 2, which might not be instantaneous. It might be level 2 has to call you back. So I've met my SLA,
Right.
but it's a bad experience for you as a user. Another example might be with CSATs, customer surveys. I called my service provider about a billing error late last year, and it took like 5 calls to get it fixed.
Wow.
But that last person, oh my goodness, she was so helpful. She was just fabulous. And when I got the CSAT survey, what am I going to do? I'm going to give her a 5, a 1 out of 5 score. Did that reflect my overall experience? Absolutely not. So
Yeah.
these measures, these SLAs just really don't capture that. So if we take a step back and we start measuring the entire experience that people have in their work, we can even slice and dice it by persona, by business role, by business unit, or by region, and then we can create this XLA. It's a score of experience, and by itself, that isn't that useful. Like, say, I've got this score, I've got all the work to create an XLA, and it's 6.2 last month, and I'm looking at it this month, and it's down to 5.9. Is that bad? By itself, just having this XLA is not useful. You need to have an organization, like an experience management organization, many call it, that are looking at this XLA data, diving deep into it, and asking some questions like what, why, and how. Like, what is this experience? Why is it changing? And then, most importantly, how do I fix it?
Yeah.
Just think of an example here. We might see, like I just said, the overall XLA dropped in January after people have come back from holiday. Of course, it might just be because they're unhappy to be back at work, but more likely there's
Right.
something else going on, right? And so an XLA is a number that's created from multiple components. I mean, I call it people happiness, PC happiness, and then a select set of SLAs. So if my experience has dropped, I'm asking the question, what's going on? It dropped. I need to then ask why, and I'm going to dig into these underlying components. Is it a people thing? Is data showing up in the PC happiness? The PC happiness, if I've got a digital experience tool that's collecting data, it might reveal that it's the French team. They're unhappy with the self-service portal. And I might go, that's weird. I mean, if I look back, people have loved the self-service portal. They were just using it up through December. So what happened? I didn't make any change to my self-service portal. At this point, this is where you really need to dig into the rest of the data. The XMO, or the experience management organizations, looking at the XLA, looking at the components, and they may discover that there was a change to Outlook, in December.
Yeah.
And they updated the knowledge articles in English, but didn't do it in French. It wasn't approved. The change control process didn't approve it. So a standard SLA in this example would rarely let you get to that level of detail, and even better yet, come to a solution. So we can see how an XLA, with all the richness of data that we've got here, and then having this experience management organization, they can quickly see changes in experience, they can fix them, and in this case, even provide insights back to the business and say, you know what, your change control process needs to be tweaked here because that was the underlying problem.
How do you look at, or how would you recommend that an organization looks at the relationship between XLAs and SLAs? I think you kind of touched on it with that last example, but they're not mutually exclusive, correct? So how should an organization look at the relationship between both of them?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll dig a little bit deeper into what goes into an XLA, and then that'll help shine a light
Yeah.
on the SLA part of it. I mentioned it's people happiness. So how do you get that? That's the subjective data you get from your employees, and it can be structured or unstructured. A number-based survey, all the way to AI analytics of your Yammer feed, collecting data
Right.
about how
Right.
people feel about IT. Um, that is a component. And then there's the PC happiness. And most people are looking at a digital experience management tool like NextThink or One Tachyon or Lakeside or Eternity. And the idea here is if my PC is having a bad day, likely I'm having a bad day as
Right.
well,
Right.
right? So those are two components. The third one then is picking select SLAs that actually relate to experience. And clearly, SLAs are still going to be needed. You need them to fine tune your operations. You still need to see how long it takes to package your app. How long does it take to get to 80%, 90%, 100% of your machines being patched, or what is the percentage of my machines who have the latest antivirus signatures? These things, if you're not measuring them, they are important. But my recommendation is to take a step back, look at your SLAs as you move to XLAs, figure out if some of your existing SLAs, like that average handle time, are actually driving negative behavior that is going to cause bad experience. And then, secondly, select just a handful of these SLAs that really do relate to experience. For example, we sometimes have SLAs on what's the total time to resolve a problem, from beginning to end. What is the average for that? That would be an important component to put into your XLA.
Change can be tough sometimes, and just there might be resistance to change. But despite the fact that this might put, in some cases, a new kind of pressure on IT, although I would argue that that pressure is already on them. But despite the fact that this might put new pressure on IT service providers and the like. Why do you think that XLAs are ultimately good for all parties involved?
Well, again, comparing them to the traditional model of SLAs, the SLA model is, I would say, it almost is adversarial. Um,
Yeah.
if the buyer is just looking for lowest cost service, they think that the better the SLAs are, that's going to make sure the cost is low. And if the SLA isn't met, then I can throw a penalty at you. Instantly, it's an adversarial relationship. But XLAs can result in more of a partnership. Now, they won't automatically, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as to how there's a pitfall there. But when done right, you can move to this where IT is now a partner of the business as opposed to this adversarial relationship. And we're seeing a real need to actually educate everyone that's involved in if you're going to be rolling out XLAs and how it can actually change how IT and business works together. It's not just this measure, but now there's this relationship that can change. And when you do XLAs right, we're finding there's three levels of insights that you can get. And SLAs really just focus on the first. It's like, what is my operation? Is my operation doing what we contracted you to do? And XLAs do that as well. But they go beyond, and they're looking at, ideally proactively improving the life of employees. So if you've got a digital experience management tool, maybe you're pulling out data to see, who's suffering in silence, who's not even calling the service desk. And these digital experience management tools allow you to even automatically resolve problems without you even calling. So that's one insight. The second is an insight into the service. How do I improve the service? Which doesn't automatically come from SLAs. An example there might be if you've got this experience management organization, the XMO, they take a step back and they ask these questions: what, why, and how. What's going on? What's changing with experience? Why is that happening? And then how can I resolve it? Now, part of that how might be we're revealing a weakness in how our service was designed and constructed. For example, we might find that the experience of our folks in Indonesia with the new chatbot is terrible. Well, we dig into it, we find out, well, it's because the translation is terrible. The technology was there, but something was missed, in how we've set up that service. So that's an important component, not just, affecting individual employees, but how do I change my service? Now, the last one, and this is the one I'm really excited about, is being able to give insights back to the business. As an example, if I'm a pharmaceutical and I see that my research scientists through XLA data are unhappy, and we dig into it and we see that their equipment's fine, but they've got a problem collaborating with a research team at a university they're partnering with. That collaboration is just terrible. Data is not secure, data gets lost or whatever. We in IT might only be able to fix part of that, but this is an insight that is really important that we share with HR. I mean, this could be an early indicator that this pharma might have a problem retaining or attracting their most valuable employees, their research scientists. We talked with one where they said, their research scientists get a call once a week to walk out the door, go across the street, and go to a competitor and work there. Part of that's money, but part of it is the experience as well. So I think it's a really great opportunity here with XLAs.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit more about then putting these XLAs into practice. So, what are some common misconceptions or maybe even mistakes that a provider may make in beginning to adopt XLAs?
I think we've kind of alluded to one. I'll probably talk about three, but the first one is just the fundamental. What is an XLA? What are the components that go into this? So how do I actually measure experience? The second problem that we're seeing is, well, once I've got this data, like I said, it's 6.9 this week and 6.8 next. So what? It's a number. What does this mean to ROI? How do I get an ROI? That is a big question. How do I get an ROI out of all this investment in measuring experience? But I think the real problem that we're seeing is this barrier, almost I would say, with procurement, translating this concept of an XLA, even if we figured out how to measure it, what you're going to do with it, into an actual service contract. What's the legal words you put around it? And when you start talking about penalties and things like that, there's this danger of moving to adversarial versus a partnership. And I see that in many cases procurement doesn't get it. There needs to be an education of the procurement organization to see what we mean by an XLA. So I'm actually kind of afraid that this thinking of penalties and things like that it may get in the way of what we're actually trying to accomplish, where IT can be a partner that is taking this experience data and shining light on causes of bad experience that may not be with the workplace organization. It might be a problem we're seeing that we detect, but it's a problem with cloud. It's a problem with security. It could even be a problem with HR. We can't fix those, but we can share insights back to the business on it. And that is, I think, a real hidden gem, a real ROI that people might miss out on if they don't implement XLAs properly.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like there's business value in that in and of itself. It's shining a spotlight. To your point, it in a very compliance driven environment that could be seen in the wrong light. But I think in the in the partnership environment that you're describing, it's really helping a business out by shining a light on something that they obviously weren't tracking in that way prior, right? So
exactly.
What about on the buyer end? So we talked a bit about the providers. What about on the buyer end? Beyond procurement, maybe what should they be looking for when introducing XLAs into their environment?
Yeah, there's a few things that seem to be essential for XLAs to be successful on both sides. It comes back to, again, this being a partnership where the data that's being collected by IT isn't just for IT. We're able to shine a light on problems that affect the business. And, like your example with your interview talking about patient experience, it actually can go all the way to customer experience, the end customer. So I think some of the recommendations I would have is, figure out, why are you doing XLAs? What do you want to accomplish by measuring experience? Describe that, articulate it. And then with that, that will drive what you want to measure. What are the exact measures? And of course, your IT provider should be providing some thoughts on that as well. What are some examples of data that maybe the business is even aware of that we have that can help with this? And then, as I've touched on before, you can have this data, you can report it in a dashboard, and that is all for naught. It's a waste of time if you don't have an organization that is looking at the data to analyze it and then recommend changes. So you have to have that. That's a new org in many cases that you have to put into place. And then, you have to commit to actually acting on the insights. That's the payoff there. Too many end up with like a cool digital experience dashboard that says your experience score is 6.2, and no one knows if that's good or bad or even what to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. Well, yeah, no, this is, I think this is a great development. And, I know it's been around for a little bit, but, still long overdue in how, extensively it's implemented. What do you see as far as, what does the near future hold? And, how are XLAs continuing to evolve, be adopted? What does the near future kind of hold for XLAs?
I think it's the future way of setting up contracts and conducting business and figuring out how IT works. I see the content of XLAs evolving and growing. As I mentioned before, the basic XLA is, people happiness, PC happiness, and select SLAs that relate to experience. But we're working on XLA 2.0, where we've added UC happiness. I mean, here, Greg, you and I are using a unified communication tool. And if that's not working, you don't have a podcast, right?
Right.
We're not collaborating. So if there are problems, and you know what happens when you call, if you had a Zoom call or a Teams call and it's not working, you call the help desk, they kind of throw up their hands. So there needs to be some technology that measures the experience of the UC and C platform, both the communication side and the collaboration side, just like we do when we're measuring, like with the DEX tool, the PC happiness. That then is a new data point that gets added in because we spend so much of our time there. And then a fifth component is the digital experience adoption, measuring that. And so what do I mean by that? We're constantly adding new technologies or new ways of doing things. And in many cases, in the workplace, that requires the employee to participate for it to be successful. Think for example, if your company goes from a phone-based service desk to chat, if you have the choice of both, are you going to change to chat? If we build it, will they come? Probably not. So there needs to be some organizational change management component thrown in where we're educating, and creating desire to use the new technology, explaining how it works, and then measuring, are people using it? Because if if that happens at your company and you're using the phone and we measure and you go phone, 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 and then you go to chat, chat, and then I see that you're going phone, phone, phone in the following weeks, that tells me we messed up. That chat experience must have been bad, or you wouldn't have switched back to the old method.
Yeah.
So those 5 components, we see happening in XLA 2.0. Future, I'm seeing exciting stuff like even looking at wellness. We're not saying, that XLAs are going to go all the way into the HR type things, but we're now beginning to be able to collect data on your experience with your digital workplace. Are you spending far too much time in meetings? Are you not having any meetings with your boss? Are you not having downtime? That type of wellness data that's related to the workplace, and that's experience related. As our workplace expands beyond the PC and the smartphone, and the tablet to IoT devices and smart devices, not just in the home but in the office, what is my experience with those? And is that making life better or worse? So measuring that as well. I see the XLAs being refined where we, not just look at the experience of the whole population, but refine it by persona or maybe by region or by business unit. And then lastly, I see a stronger connection between measuring employee experience through XLAs and the measures of customer experience and how those tie together. I mean, if we do this right, I think XLAs and experience management, it's really game changing, Greg.
Yeah, I totally agree. This is exciting stuff. Well, for those that want to read up a little bit more on this, or read, watch, listen, what would you recommend they do?
I'm not as prolific as you are in your podcast, Greg. I don't know how you crank, this many out and with such quality. It's awesome. But
I don't
yeah,
sleep. But...
I would. You don't sleep. I suggest people take a listen at my podcast, the Digital Workplace Deep Dive. And there we have been focusing on more than half of the episodes have been around experience and looking at different aspects of it, even, the security implications. Also, I'm a host on XLA TV. There's 4 different channels there: The Climb, The New Alchemist, there's XLA Plus, and The New World of Work Plus. We've got recordings of people with their aha moments. So we have both the vendors that are driving new stuff with experience, and also people, using it in anger, so to speak, and their journey on moving forward with experience management. So those are 2 sources.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, I highly recommend both. Great sources for this. Well, Weston, thanks so much for joining the show. For those that want to keep up with what you're doing, what's the best way to connect?
Yeah, LinkedIn. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm there, and I love interacting with people. I find that such a great platform for exchanging robust ideas and discussion, especially around experience management.
Wonderful. Well, again, I'd like to thank Weston Morris, Director of Global Strategy at Digital Workplace Services at Unisys, for joining the show. Thanks for listening to The Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom. Talk with you next week. Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.theagilebrand.show. To get a copy of my latest book, Meaningful Measurement of the Customer Experience, visit my website at gregkihlstrom.com. Until next week, stay agile.